He was a fellow student.
Well,
Hi, everyone.
For what?
Hi, Brandon.
okay. Right, well, let's get going. Thank you all for joining us this evening in this webinar on the Euronews project, Rediscovering the Medici Avvisi. And today you'll be hearing from me. I'll be introducing, and other members of the Euronews team. So Wouter Kreuze will be talking about the 1600 experiment, a year of news. Wouter is a student in the Digital Arts and Humanities program at University College Cork and a fellow of the project. And then you will be hearing from Carlotta Paltrinieri and Sara Mansutti about the multi-language of the Avvisi. Let me start sharing my screen without further ado. So I hope that's working. Right. So Carlotta is the co-director of the Medici Archive project and a fellow of the project, and Sara Mansutti is also a fellow and a graduate student at University College Cork in Digital Arts and Humanities. Well, what we're going to do today is talk about the Euronews project, what it's doing, what we're about. And this image, I think, in a way, epitomizes some of the issues of our project. What we're attempting to do is to analyze the Avvisi, the handwritten newsletters that are present in the Medici archives in Florence, according to a number of criteria that we'll talk about in a moment. Now, I think if Cesare Ripa had an emblem of the Avvisi, it would look something like this. And you see here are the three basic problems that we're dealing with in the study of the Avvisi. So you have an individual reading an avviso, so the avviso and its reception and diffusion, and then you have a question of what actually is in the avviso, which of course is the story that you see being played out or fought out on the right-hand side between a Spaniard and a Frenchman. And finally, you see a number of people reacting to the avviso in regard to whether the information is true or not. Now, we have a large number of volumes of Avvisi in the archive in Florence, possibly about 200 volumes between the Mediceo del Principato and the Miscellanea Medicia. And the material we're looking at mostly looks like this slide here. So you see a handwritten sheet of news with the place of publication, you might say, at the top, in this case, Antwerp, and the date, mostly anonymous. This particular one is talking about a relatively important, I think, issue. So it's the Spanish Armada and the preparations that are being made for the Armada on the coast of Flanders, as well as the reactions that are occurring within the England of Elizabeth I to deflect whatever damage the Armada might be doing. This is also an iconic example of an apocryphal story about the origins of my family, because of course, a portion of the Armada was wrecked on the shores of Ireland, but that's a very different story. Now, how far back do the Avvisi actually go? The diary of Marino Sanudo of the late 15th century already talks about some examples that look very much like Avvisi, although very often they have an author. So here we have some summaries of letters from Naples that are written more or less in the same form as an aviso. So we imagine sometime in the 15th century. The ones we're talking about are in the Archivio Medicio del Principato, and so are dating from between 1537 and 1737. And there is an index of this material, but it's relatively incomplete, not to say rather deeply flawed, which means that we've had to compile our own lists of material. So for instance, we have this hand list, which includes most of the volumes that we're attempting to deal with, and you can see the distribution according to the various researchers in our project, and there are other researchers besides the ones that you will be meeting today. And as we proceed through our analysis of the volumes in the archive, we are finding more and more citations of Avvisi, examples in places where they haven't been sought before, and where they are rather unexpected. There we are at work in the archive, in the modern situation of the archive, as you can see, under social distancing and wearing our face coverings and so on and so forth. This is a typical volume that you might find devoted to Avvisi. They often include 300 to 500 exemplars, often 2 to 4 or 6 folios long. And here is another example. This happens to be one from Madrid that apparently was particularly liked by the reader. You can see a little hand up there in the right-hand corner, which apparently has been sketched to draw attention to this aviso, possibly because of this particular news, which is that millions have come into Seville on the ships carrying gold from the New World. So the origins are extremely various. We go from Vienna to Venetia, to Londra, to Madrid, to Antwerp, to Constantinople. So the variety is extreme. Also the languages, very often the language is Italian, although not exclusively. So we find examples in Spanish, in French, in Latin, and occasionally we've heard of examples also in German in the archive in Florence. So here is what we do with the material we get. So we're transcribing here, and this is what you see when you consult MIA, the database that we're working with within the material of the Medici Archive project. And here is our wonderful XML coding, which we're very proud of. And you can see at the top, this particular example comes from Madrid, and there you have the date. And there you have a news heading from a particular story, which in this case comes from Seville. And so on we go to, we have word count position within the newsletter, so we can compare newsletters across cultures and across regions and places. And finally, we have the various topics to which they respond. Our approach and methodology involve also qualitative discussions of aspects concerned with places of publication and production of news and circulation of news, the relations of news to power, the relation between news and commerce, the circulation of goods as mentioned in the news, the diffusion of news and its impact on those who read it, and finally, the rhetoric of news in terms of what it says and how it says it. So thank you very much. That's a very basic introduction, and please follow us on Twitter at Euronews Project and visit our website at www.euronewsproject.org. And our next speaker is Wouter Kreuze. So thank you, Wouter.
Yeah, thank you very
Step
much.
up, please.
Yeah, let me share my screen for a moment, and then we're ready to start. So, as Brennan already said, I will say something about the 1600 project, a year of news. My name is Wouter Kreuze. I'm a PhD student at College Cork. So, what is the 1600 project actually? As Brennan already said, there are many volumes in the archives here, and it's very hard to transcribe everything. But what we try to do in the 1600 project is at least to find and to transcribe all the Avvisi from this particular year. And the great advantage, of course, is that after we've done that, we have data to work with. And that's what I will try to do in this presentation. I will not necessarily look into individual Avvisi, but I will try to see what kind of data we have and what we could do with it and what kind of questions this data could answer. So how is this collected? Well, Brandon already had a great example of how the data is collected with XML. And very generally speaking, we could say that there are three types collected, which are transcriptions, dates, and places. So how did I process this data? I used, amongst others, Python, which is a coding language, of course, for those who are not aware. And as we will see later, I also use Voyant, which is a web-based research tool, which processes the data for you, but also allows you to use visualizations, which I think sometimes can be very nice. So one of the first things one could do, of course, is just count everything there is. This is, I think, a good beginning. So, for example, I count this case 74, then the news headers, which you just saw in one of the photographs of Brendan, in which it says in the particular case he showed it was from Antwerp. But in some cases, one and the same document can actually have several news headers. And in this case, we have found 82 news headers for the year 1600 so far. There are almost 400 news items. A news item in this case is just like the single item under the headers. And at the moment, the corpus has more than 30,000 words. So it's like a novel. Of course, you count the average. For example, the average news item from the year 1600 appears to be about 80 words. We could also look at how many news items there are under the average header. And apparently, by average, it is 4.6. Of course, as I already said before, some documents have actually several news headers, but there aren't that many. So, well, just to show, I also counted them. So apparently, there are 69 documents with one header. There are 3 documents with 2 headers. There's another one with 3 headers, and there's one special one which apparently has 4 headers. But of course, we could also collect very different kind of information. For example, I talked about locations. So I also counted them, which I think is very interesting. So here we see the hubs, at the top, we see the hubs, which are the headers that I talked about earlier. The left, vertically at the left, we see the different locations where the news actually is from. And as you can see from this table, which I think is very interesting, because maybe it's different than expected and often thought, is that actually a lot of news is about the hub itself. For example, for Rome, we see that there are 37 news items actually on Rome itself. And this also goes for different news hubs. Of course, the complete list is way longer than this because at the end there are many different locations that are being named. So I only picked here the most. But to show it a bit further, I made this specific graph for Rome. And we can see that actually for the year 1600 at least, more than 3/4 of the Avvisi, of the news items under the headers of Rome are actually about Rome itself, which I thought was pretty interesting. A very obvious other thing we could do is just count other words, and this is exactly what I did right here. So I counted them in 2 ways. I just counted their totality, like how often they appeared in total, and I also counted in how many different news items these words actually appeared, because obviously one and the same word can appear more than once in the same news item. Obviously, I removed a lot of stop words like a lot of preposition, a lot of adverbs. And what's left, as you can see, the sort of the most common words are many titles. What you also usually see a lot are many nationalities, like at the 10th place here we see Turco, Turkish. These are generally words that appear very often. But as already announced, we could also use other tools to count the words. Well, one could, for example, and that's what I did here, use Voyant. The nice thing about Voyant is that it also allows you to use XML. That's how we collect our data. So in this case, that is perfect. And here it allows you, as you can see on the screen, to specify the data that you are putting in Voyant. And well, to show you what the result could be, we could go to our Voyant. We'll give an error, but it will still give us data. So we hope. There it is. So what I like specifically about is that's interactive, and that it's pretty easy once you have the data to create this kind of tools that you can just play around with a bit, see what kind of relationships appear. For example, here it shows that the word, well, versus maybe not very interesting, let's say guerra, it appears 38 times in 35 documents. And you also see like the red ones are the words that often appear together. You can also make it a bit more sensitive, and then you will see that there will be a lot of red stuff. As you can see here, guerra apparently it appears very often together with pace, as you might expect. Also with Masta, which may be less significant. But let us get back to our presentation. Another thing we could do, of course, is combine two different things, because what we just saw is all the words together, which we could also specify it by time, since we also collect the date. And that's what I did in the following graph. So so we see for every month how often, in this case, I looked for different forms of the word Hollanda or Hollandaise, so Dutch or the Netherlands, and the words combined of war and peace. But then again, there's also the interactive version, which is of course way more interesting, because you could put in specific queries. And actually, Voyant still has, as you saw, many possibilities to combine different kind of words. Or let me see, what could we do? We could, for example, if you want to know things about boats, we say the asterisk so he combines all words that start with nabe, which is of course also very dangerous, because you might take words into account that you don't want to. But for example, if we say Turk, and then we put the asterisk to pick Turco, but also Turkesco, and then we get a graph. And I think it's a very nice tool, and as I said, once you have the data, it's pretty, once you know how to do it, it's pretty easy to set up. And that's what I particularly like about it. Let's continue with the presentation. But then at some point when I did this, I actually realized, of course, I could also be a bit more creative, because what I did first is, for the content, I put in the transcriptions. But since we also have a field in which we collect the news from, so the location where the news is taking place, I could also just put that in for content, and then I can see how often a certain place appears through time. So in the graph here, unfortunately, Voyant doesn't automatically copy the legenda in the picture, but we still have the interactive version, so that is no problem. Let's just open it. And then we can see, as I said, how the frequency of a certain place changes through time. So let's say we want to know, well, maybe we want to know Genoa. It also presents Genoa. And then we can see how it changes through time, which I thought was also a nice feature, and an example how we could use these tools also very creatively. So that was what I wanted to say. And I think the nice thing about this is that even if you have only like a few different types of data, so in this case, the transcriptions, the dates, and the places, you can already combine it in many different ways, in which you can actually create a lot of different visualizations, a lot of different data, and there are actually many different research questions that you could study. So that's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
I'm going to talk to you about another case study. Specifically, what I wanted to show you is not so much about a specific year, but it's about what Bredan was saying earlier about the presence of different languages in the Avvisi. I will, for the sake of time and for the lightning nature of this talk, I will only show you a few examples of this coexistence of different languages in the Avvisi. I'm talking again about the Avvisi from Rome. Specifically, these are the ones on which I'm working. In this volume of Avvisi, this is an example on the left of a very well-kept volume, while on the right of some not well-kept volume of Avvisi from Rome. As you can see there, you can read Vari Avvisi di Roma. So starting with, of course, not all of the Avvisi that are not Italian look non-Italian. You, in fact, find some hidden Avvisi in different languages that have been translated. For example, in this first avviso, it looks like your usual avviso, so di Roma, il 2 di agosto 1586, so your header, and then the avviso that you would expect. If you turn the folio, however, you will find at the bottom of your avviso tradotto dall'inglese. So
sorry, Carlotta, we
Yes.
can't see the presentation.
Oh, you can't. Sorry. Okay, hold on. Let me try again. Okay. Share. Thank you, Sara. It would have been a little dull.
Yes, now it's working.
Is it? Can you see the screen
Yes.
now? Okay, I will. Is it working now?
Yeah.
Okay. So these are the well-kept versus not well-kept volumes. And this is the avviso I was talking about. So it looks like your usual avviso from Rome. But actually, if you turn the folio, you see tradotto dall'inglese, so translated from English into Italian. But this specific feature is not the only thing that makes you understand when you read the avviso that it might not have been an avviso written originally in Italian. Very quickly, I'll show you this example of this avviso. So it comes from the avviso I was showing you, this section. It talks about this gentil donna cattolica, so this gentlewoman, Catholic gentlewoman. That's something happened in the città di Eboraco, which is York, is the ancient name for York. So what happens here is that some Catholics tortured and killed this woman by crushing her chest between two stones. So this very cruel and graphic description of this event is usually something that we find in the Avvisi from Rome when dealing with Protestants and their practices and their cruelty. So when you're reading this avviso, even if they were not written tradotto dall'inglese, you would have a clue that it might not have been an original avviso in Italian. Moving on, you also have the expression tradotto in Italiano right at the beginning and in the header. In this case, we don't know from where, from which languages it is translated, but you can tell from the place where it comes from Paris, that it was probably an avviso in French translated into Italian. And this is a very peculiar case that I found. I haven't found anywhere else yet, but please, if you found something similar, let me know. Of a volume of avvisi from Rome, these specific ones are from Lyon, and they're from, and they're avvisi in Italian, but one of them within this avvisi is actually in Spanish. What I notice here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not an expert of the 16th century Spanish, It looks to me here that this language is a hybrid language. It doesn't look like this Avviso was copied from the original, but rather the writer attempted a Spanish Avviso. This is my understanding, but of course we can discuss this, and perhaps it was a dialect of a way of saying maggio, that it was also in Spanish. There are, of course, Avvisi that are entirely in a different language. For example, this is an Avviso in Latin. And there are others, for example, and I have to thank Davide Boerio, one of our team members, who uploaded this Avviso, which is not in the Medici del Principato, which is the primary collection that we are studying, but is in Miscellanea Medicia, which is another collection that holds all of the material that was not included in other collections. So in this collection, we have Avvisi from London, and in this Avvisi, we have an Avvisi in French. So that will also be interesting to look into these connections. And we have further Avvisi in proper Spanish, for example, this one in 1568, and which covers a lot of, about 4 folios. And this one that I'm showing you here specifically is from Augusta, and it is written in grammatically correct Spanish, from my understanding again. So I wanted to show you this specific example because Sara will actually show you how we are dealing with this multilinguistic aspect of the Avvisi. Again, we were surprised to see these many Avvisi in different languages. Of course, in a collection that was Avvisi gathered in Florence, but of course the Medici collections are a very global collection, so this is not actually too unpredictable. So I will leave now the floor to Sara, who will show you practically how we are analyzing this body of multilinguistic Avvisi. So thank you, Sara.
Thank you, Carlotta. I will now briefly delve into the model we are creating through Transcribus to automatically transcribe the Avvisi, and more broadly, every Italian administrative document ranging between the 16th and the 17th century. So many of the documents kept today in the Italian state archives. This model is the result of the collaboration with Jake Dybel, Antonio Iodice, and Rachel Midura, whom I would like to thank. First of all, what is Transcribus and what is a model? Transcribus is a comprehensive platform for the automated recognition, transcription, and searching of historical documents. Thanks to an advanced text recognition technology based on artificial neural networks, and thanks to machine learning principles, Transcribus enables users to extract data from unwritten text via HTR. Unwritten text recognition, HTR, is similar to optical text recognition, OCR. But while OCR focuses on individual letters and works well with printed text, HTR processes the entire line. Here you see the workflow of HTR in Transcribus. After importing digitized images and identifying text regions and lines, you can apply an existing model if it is suitable to the writing style and language of your documents, or you have to train your own model. To do this, you need a certain amount of images and transcriptions on which the model can be trained. We are now at this stage. We have already trained 2 versions of our model, and after an increase in transcription, we are planning to train a 3rd version at the end of this week, because the more transcription and images are fed to the machine, the more accurate the model is likely to be. A sufficient set of training data, which can be used to train the HTR engine, is 15,000 transcribed words, or around 75 pages, if the text is written in only one hand. But if the collection contains more hands and more languages, as in our case, it is recommended a higher number of transcribed words. Our model is based on correspondence newsletters, legal and commercial papers ranging between 1550 and 1700 from the state archives of Milan, Venice, Florence, Genoa, and Pisa. And the training set of the 2nd version is 52,820 words. The accuracy of a model is measured by the character error rate, which in our model is 12.24%. This means that 88% of characters in an automatically generating transcription will be correct. The desired error rate is below 10%, and we hope to reach this level of accuracy in the next version. But currently, our biggest challenges are the wide variety of hands and the improvement of the vocabulary. Now, I will show you some examples of the model in action. With these two documents, the model works very well, and the computer-interpreted text, when compared to the transcription made by us, has a character error rate below 10%. For instance, in the first example, the first line is all correct, while the model has trouble with the abbreviated word confini in the second line, detecting some spaces and with some capital letters, like S of Sua Maestà in the fourth line. Transcription like this can be corrected relatively quickly, and the effort will be less than transcribing them from scratch. The model performs poorly when the images are blurred as due to the ink passing through the page, or with cursive hands because of the intense ligatures. In this example, the automatic transcription is less useful as a starting point for a digital edition or to the creation of a corpus to be analyzed with semantic and linguistic techniques, because correcting all the errors would be very time-consuming. However, the keyword spotting, a sophisticated searching technology inside Transcribus, works also with a less accurate transcription, enabling users to find all the possible matches of a given word, even if words have been not transcribed correctly by HTR. Last, how does the model perform with Avvisi not in Italian? HTR technology is language independent and can be trained on every alphabet and language. Our model is built on Italian documents and has an Italian vocabulary, but it can be applied also to Spanish, French, and Latin text to some extent. I tried it on the last newsletter in Spanish shown by Carlotta, which is written in a humanistic and clear hand. The results are promising. The character error rate raises only to 17%, and some words are interpreted entirely correctly. I believe that it would be easy to create a Spanish model using ours as a base, adding a small number of Spanish texts to the training set. We will release our model as soon as possible, probably in the next week. It will be made available on Transcribus, so everyone can use the model, whereas the documents on which it has been trained remain private. We will announce it via Twitter and on the Euronews website. We will encourage you to try it soon, also because Transcribus have announced that they will introduce a paywall later this year, while at the moment the platform is freely available online. To conclude, I'm aware that Transcribus will not replace scholars, whose critical interpretation will always play a fundamental role in reading and analyzing archival documents. However, HTR is useful today and will become even more useful in the future to make digitized archival sources searchable and to explore new research paths. So that's all. Thank you for listening our talk. And now we have time for questions. So please write your questions to all the four speakers in the Q&A box, and we will be happy to answer.
All right, so while people are formulating their questions, I don't see any yet. Let me just comment on a few things in all of your very interesting talks. And I like the insight that there still is room for human transcription. That's very helpful to know. Also because one aspect that we've certainly learned in the context of this work is just how much value one gets from actually transcribing this material. And so one does gain a very much firsthand sense of what the news environment of the 17th and the 18th century was by having to write it down. So it's possibly an aspect that we would never want to completely lose hold of, although certainly transcribus is going to be a big help. Another feature as we wait for more questions. It occurred to me that our research is faced with a classic dilemma, and this is built, in a way, it's built into what we do, and that is the two rules of history, which is if you have a lot of things, count them, and if you have a few things, sit down, describe them. But it turns out we have some elements which are extremely interesting to describe, and Carlotta has shown some magnificent cases. At the same time, we have a vast amount of material, and we are finding that the quantitative aspect and the social science aspect are also extremely fascinating, as Wouter has shown.
So I think there was a question actually on the 1600 project.
Excellent.
The question is if the same tools could be used to reconstruct or document social networks. I have another question, because Voyant actually has within Voyant itself you have many different tools, and some are also for networks. But as far as I know, they are still in kind of beta phase, so they haven't been completely developed. So I think, of course, with Python itself, which is a coding language, so you could basically do anything you want, as long as you find a way of how to do it. But I think if you really want to do networks, you probably need to use tools specifically for networks. But I haven't really, we were still planning to look into that, but I haven't done that yet at this point.
As we continue here, we are actually having a conversation tomorrow with Christoph Kudella, who is very adept at utilizing the Gephi program, which is dedicated to recreating networks. And his dissertation project at University College Cork was a network study of the correspondence of Erasmus, many of the insights of which can be applied to the kinds of stuff we're working with.
I was looking at the comment that Rachel made on her documents, having a hybrid of Spanish and Italian from the Milanese State Archive. So thank you for saying that. I will definitely, perhaps we can compare them and see what kind of hybridity they have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One aspect that is truly fundamental in what we're doing, and I think Carlotta and Sara, you both brought that out very well, is this, let's say, the challenge of multilingualism. So in the sense we have transcription programs that we want to attempt to utilize in the context of many languages. And we also have the challenge of comparing. So how do we compare, for instance, newsletters in one language with newsletters in another by using, let's say, corpus analysis? This, of course, is a question to pose to our friend Nick Brownlees, who's an expert on translations. So question would be, are there ways of formulating corpus interrogations when the corpus is fundamentally multilingual? It's a, let's say, it's an aspect that is at the edge of the possibilities of our technology, but it's something where we want to widen the boundaries. Question to Brendan. What is the relation between the handwritten Avvisi and printed gazettes? Great question. Of course, the printed gazettes in Florence and the rest of Italy start around the 1640s. I think I saw one printed gazette from Florence. I don't think it was actually continued for very long, but it as was often the case of printed gazettes, was a basic transcription from the Avvisi at the time. And so this is a phenomenon that we find repeated across the whole range of gazettes, starting with the earliest in 1605 in Germany, of which the known exemplars start to be available in 1609. And those early ones look just like an avviso. And if it looks like an avviso and it smells like an avviso, it's probably an avviso. Unfortunately, we haven't found the originals, the original handwritten basis of many of these gazettes. But it is the case that we've found avvisi in Florence, which seem to be exactly translated in the English Corantos of the same time. Okay, that's a big subject, and thank you for bringing that up. Oh, we're now in. We have some more questions here. So do we have? Whoops! Do we have any clue who were the authors of the Avvisi? Good question. Let me leave it to my collaborators to answer that. Sara, you have some important insight on that, right?
Yeah, there are not authors of this type of Avvisi. I'm studying the Avvisi sent by Cosimo Bartoli, the Florentine resident in Venice. But I suspect that he didn't write the Avvisi. He only collected the news item arriving in Venice, but he is not the author of them.
Yeah, I guess we're still debating on the rules of compilers versus collectors, and we're still trying to see where that goes.
Well, there was a great story in the Roman archive of notaries who were arrested because they were going against the Sistine rule against circulation of Avvisi in the late 16th century. And they defended themselves. They said, "We do not make Avvisi. We copy them. So it's not us." I didn't read the rest of the court documents, so I can't tell you whether this defense actually worked or not. But it was a plausible defense. On the other hand, did Ippolito Buondelmonte in the early 17th century write the Avvisi di Venezia? He seems to think he did. But of course, remember the main theoretical issues in regard to authorship. So is authorship the original project of a single mind, or is authorship appropriation? And these are fundamental linguistic and theoretical questions in regard to literature. So when Buondelmonte says, does that mean that his authorship involves a certain kind of piracy of appropriating things from others and putting his stamp on them? Anonymous stamp, understand, but still his prestige being the person who circulates these things. So these are open questions, and I think each case has to be examined on its own. We are certainly tracing whatever authors, or let's say whatever circulators, with taking into account what Sara has just pointed out, we are certainly tracking the circulators of Avvisi.
But I think that at least in the 16th century, the situation is quite vague because
Indeed.
I found a ban of the Republic of Venice against everyone who spread the news, not only in the written form, but also in through the voice. So
yes,
people could not speak about news in the square.
Right. So what news from Rialto? Shut up. That sort of thing. Yeah. So.
I think that there is a related question to it by Tom, asking if there is a correlation between the scribbles and the comments that that are written next to the Avvisi, or sometimes that I found, and I showed Brendan a couple of weeks ago, that there were underlining of sentences, of the sentences that they deemed important, or they just, they went over the sentence to erase it. So how is asking, could this be the compiler of news dismissing the contents of for posterity or not? So what are the relation between the two phenomena?
I think that's a great question. And I would say what we have in these cases is a hugely important testimony to impact. So it's very rare that you actually have a case of a person reading an Avviso, except in the engraving of Giuseppe Mitelli, which I showed at the beginning. The actual reading, sometimes we have attestations of, for instance, Avvisi being read in the Senate or in the Great Council, as in Marino Sanudo's case. But again, the reaction of the individuals who hear it, it's hard to say. But when we have actual, you might say, graffiti on the Avviso, when the Avviso is somehow defaced by the person who read it, or bits are underlined, or there are comments, these are important occasions that we want to trace to understand what exactly is being taken into consideration. In other words, are the things that are thought of as being important to that individual and to that time the same things that we would regard? So it's a precious occasion, and we're certainly trying to trace those as much as we can. I showed an example in a slide of mine where the person reading it had actually drawn a little hand pointing to the data at the top of the page, which was talking about circulation of gold doubloons, important feature. So we get reactions of all kinds, and the point is to make some sense of them. Okay.
There is a question about the number of news headers per Avviso.
Okay.
Yeah, I've read it indeed. If I can answer first, I mean, people can
go ahead. Yeah.
Indeed, I think it's correct. It's a bit weird that there are so few. I don't know why, because I don't know what the experience of the others are, but I wouldn't say there's always more than one header. But for other years, when I transcribed Avvisi, there are actually, well, pretty regularly more than one header, 2, sometimes 3. Never really a lot more than 4, I think. Maybe it's just in 1600. Maybe it's because there are relatively few Italian Avvisi. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. So I don't know what the experience of the others are.
It's a good question. Obviously, Joe, I would think that it sometimes, at least in my experience, it depends on the particular series. And very often we find a run of Avvisi from Rome that are all in the same hand, at least for a certain period. And so we assume that they are coming from the same shop, or the same individual is doing the copying, things like that. And the same goes for Venice. These are shops where large numbers of these things are coming out. And so we find different typologies. So some of these we find just loaded with local information. So there's not that much, let's say, variety in terms of place from where information is coming. It's all coming from Rome, or it's all coming from Venice. That's a typology. Another typology, of course, is the compilation of different informations from presumably. So we could, I suppose, think of the mono origin type of Avviso, and then the poly origin type of Avviso. And so the mono origin tends to be mostly news about that place, but then the sort of, these poly origin types of Avviso may be compilations from many different mono origin Avvisi. So in other words, they are at another remove from the ones that are uniquely devoted to a single place. So I would say the variety of Avvisi that we find in Florence is at least equal to the variety we get in the Fuggerzeitungen. I hope we didn't give the impression that there was a particular unique stamp on the Florentine collection, which is really from everywhere. It's an extraordinarily diverse and very wide-ranging collection, just as obviously the Fuggerzeitungen one is. One thing we're attempting to do in our research is to maintain the integrity of the documents, which is, let's say, it's a there are some constraints. So while at the same time we're interested in understanding a single Avviso and how it is put together, we're also interested in the individual stories. And our particular program, the technology we're using, allows us to do that. So on the one hand, we can study the document as a whole, and we can understand a whole range of these documents and the context of writing of these documents. And at the same time, we're interested in comparing the various single stories. So we're still wrestling with the issue of how do we separate out single stories from separate places within a single document. It involves important choices among the team, and we are attempting at this moment to further refine our ability to sort these out and to make this differentiation within each document. That's what I would say. Any comments from other team members? All right. I thought there was something from so Rachel is asking, are all of the Medici Archive Avvisi preserved by virtue of their original inclusion in correspondence? I would say yes, because the Medici Archive is par excellence an archive of correspondence, with some important exceptions. So I'd say largely the fruit of a circulation. I hope that answers your question.
And perhaps we could add that, Rachel, we're now, thanks to this platform on which we are uploading and inserting metadata, we're trying to reconstruct these original look that the Avvisi had. So they were coming, as you said, as attachments to letters. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to find in the carteggi where that letter went, and try to put it together, to reattach it virtually to its original Avviso.
Right, and our platform allows us to do that because the platform is including letters of all kinds, as well as the Avvisi and the news, which is a separate section within the database. Might call it our playground within the Medici Archive database, with all of its connections to the other elements within the database. Another question, are Avvisi documents also classified, interpreted the same way as we see or read the development of various centers of Renaissance and Baroque art? Right. How do we recognize or categorize Avvisi considering variations in language? Right. Geflügene Zeitungen, I think they were called in German. Then there's avisos in Spanish. There's a word in every tongue. And there's also a certain ambiguity in some of the usages, so that originally the term gazzetta, I understand, would have been applied because of the cost of an aviso at that time, which the gazzetta was a unit of money. All of this you will find in Mario Infelice's wonderful book, Prima dei Giornali. So what we have found is that apart from the name, whatever they were called, wherever they were, the form is surprisingly the same. That's I guess, the extraordinary aspect that drew us to these collections, and that drew us to the idea of comparing these collections all across Europe, so that the newsletters that you find at Kew in London in form are very similar to the ones we're working at, which are very similar to the Fuggerzeitungen, which are very similar to the ones in the various municipal archives in France. So, right, how do we categorize them, considering the language? Yeah, we're that's a good question. We're calling it all news, basically. And then if it's in Spanish, we use the Spanish word, and if it's in French, we use the French word. That's the best answer.
Well, also there are other typologies that we encountered. We have relazioni, we have rapporti, and now I cannot think of any other, but we are classifying them as a news other. So it's still a content and a matter of news, but it's a slightly different, not even form, but at least the header, of course, it has a different nomenclature than the usual ones.
How common is it for contemporaneous compilers of newsletters to add comments on the Avvisi? Okay. Oh, wait a minute. We did this one, right? Yeah, we already answered that. That was Tom's question. Could you talk a little bit about the rhetoric? Okay, rhetoric. Are there recognizable ways of construct? Well, this is perfect. Sarah and I are working on a paper in this regard. Carlotta and I are working on a paper in this regard.
I mean, I guess the number one thing that we noticed is that the way of introducing a news is always directly related to how sure you were about that news. So the veracity and the directness of the rhetorical devices used are always, they go hand in hand. And for example, they're usually, I guess the most frequent way of introducing a news is si dice che. So it is said, so they try to keep this distance from the news if they don't want to have responsibilities of consequences to what they're saying. But there are also other Avvisi that are very clearly, they're sure about what they're saying. So they want to underline that they know and that they are the first ones that they are giving them news. So also this idea of fresh news and the most recent one is something that goes hand in hand. So that is sort of the categories that we're looking at when we're looking at rhetoric.
Yeah, actually, it's a fascinating question because there is a particular language that belongs to this. So there is an idiom of news. It's in the Italian context, it involves run-on sentences. This is also true in Spanish. I'm less familiar with the English examples, but so sentences that just go on and on and on, and very often they are punctuated. So you have a semicolon, and it just goes on into another related aspect, and then another semicolon and another related aspect, beginning each of these clauses by que. Okay, so, or that. In other words, starting at the beginning of the aviso, it'll say, it is, if the news came in from so-and-so, and then it goes, that such and such and such and such, that such and such and such and such, that such and such and such and such, on and on and on and on, forming a sort of concatenation of sometimes miscellaneous factoids joined together in this interesting rhetorical ploy to draw the reader along, and join also the rhetoric of what's happening to the rhetoric of what we think about it in terms of whether it could be true or not.
And one thing maybe that we can add is this very interesting influence of a literary language in the Avvisi, and we're discussing this also with Davide Boerio, another team member, about these levels of speech. So there are sometimes reported speech, and they are highlighted with an underlining. They're not usually quotes, if I remember correctly. They're usually underlining, and they switch from the third person to the first person. So that's when you know that they're reporting directly a conversation. And that's when you know that they really wanted to show how close to the source they were.
Right. To that, you could also add the a growing appreciation of the varieties in quality. And one thing I noticed when I was studying impact was, let's say, third-person commentary regarding quality over factuality. So somebody said, you know, these newsletters are such a pleasure to read. I mean, they're full of falsehoods, but it's just they're entertaining. And then there are others that may be less full of falsehood, but they're just written in such a rough and dull style that they simply don't conform to the criteria of good courtly writing, and that makes them unacceptable. So there's this interesting paradox that we see. I think at this point that brings our exercise to a conclusion, at least the formal part. The rest, of course, continues to take place in the blogosphere, which is attached to this crowdcast, and you're welcome to hang out for I think another half hour or hour, I'm not sure exactly. But I want to thank you all for your attention, your patience, and for your wonderful questions. Actually, I think there are a number of issues that have come up in this lightning context that we want to pursue more, and we are very happy to hear from you. Please contact us. You'll find our coordinates on the website, and follow us, as I said, at our website and on Twitter. And we would be happy to answer any further questions that you may have and give whatever attention you may need to topics and interests that you are working on. So, thank you very much.